Robert Maxwell never imagined that disguising himself as an ordinary customer would change his life forever. When he ordered a simple plate of grilled ribeye steak, the waitress Chloe approached nervously and discreetly slid a note under his napkin. What he read on that note left him completely paralyzed. What dangerous message could an employee risk passing to a complete stranger? What happened next would shock him. Robert removed the gold Rolex he always wore on his wrist, carefully placing it in his office safe. His bespoke Italian suit hung in the closet, replaced by a simple shirt and worn jeans he had bought that very morning. He looked at himself in the marble bathroom mirror of his penthouse apartment on the Upper East Side, Manhattan, one of New York's most exclusive neighborhoods. The man staring back at him was no longer Robert Maxwell, owner of the most successful chain of restaurants in New York City and the surrounding states. He was simply Robert, an ordinary guy who wanted something to eat, but there was something deeper in that transformation. He was tired, so tired of the fake smiles, the automatic yes sirs, the gazes that saw only money when they looked at him. He wanted to know what it felt like to be treated like a normal person. He wanted to discover if anyone could see him for who he truly was, not for what he had in the bank. His chauffeur waited downstairs with the armored SUV, but Robert walked to the corner and hailed a yellow cab. The driver, an older gentleman with a gray mustache, looked at him in the rearview mirror as he pulled away. "Where to, pal?" he asked with that drawn-out New York accent Robert loved to hear. "To the Heritage Grill, please," he replied, feeling a knot in his stomach, as if it were the first time he was visiting his own business. During the ride, he observed the city he loved so much. The distant glimmer of the Hudson River embracing the neighborhoods, the modern skyscrapers blending with older constructions, people rushing along the sidewalks with that characteristic New York hustle. The city was his home, but it had been years since he had lived it as an ordinary citizen. He was always transported in armored cars, always entered through service entrances, always surrounded by security. Today would be different. Today he would be free. When the cab stopped in front of the Heritage Grill, Robert felt a knot in his stomach. It was his most beloved restaurant, the first one he had opened 10 years ago, when he still dreamed of honoring traditional American cuisine. The exposed brick facade and wrought iron details greeted him as always, but this time there would be no red carpet, no manager rushing out to greet him. He paid the taxi driver with crumpled bills, which he had specially saved for the occasion, and walked towards the main entrance. His hands trembled slightly as he pushed the glass door. The familiar aroma of warm sourdough bread, grilled steak, and kitchen spices hit him like a nostalgic caress. That place represented everything he loved about American cuisine tradition, family, food made with love, but it also represented an empire that had distanced him from those very roots. Customers laughed and chatted at their tables, oblivious to the fact that the owner of it all had just entered disguised among them. Gary Peterson, the restaurant manager, was overseeing the tables when he saw a man enter who made no special impression on him. He was of average height, dark-haired, with simple clothes and shoes that had seen better days. He didn't even bother to approach personally. "Sarah," he shouted to one of the hostesses, "table for the gentleman by the door." Robert waited by the entrance, observing how other customers were received with more enthusiasm. A well-dressed family arrived right after him. Immediately, Gary approached with his best smile, greeted everyone effusively, and escorted them to a window table with a view of the inner courtyard. Robert clenched his fists in his pockets. It was exactly what he had suspected in his own restaurant, what he had built on the philosophy that all customers deserved the same respect. They were making distinctions based on appearance. Sarah finally arrived with a barely disguised expression of impatience. "Table for how many?" she asked without even looking him in the eye. "For one, please," Robert replied, trying to maintain his composure. The table assigned to him was in the most forgotten corner of the restaurant, next to the kitchen door, where the clatter of plates and the comings and goings of the staff constantly interrupted. It had no view of the inner courtyard he had personally designed, nor was it near the smooth jazz musicians playing in the background. It was the kind of table where they placed customers they considered less important. Robert sat on the metal chair that groaned under his weight and picked up the menu with hands that no longer trembled nervously, but with contained indignation. All of this was his. Every chair, every plate, every ingredient in the kitchen. He had invested not only millions of dollars but his heart and soul to create a place where people could feel at home. Now, disguised as an ordinary customer, he discovered that this dream had turned into a nightmare of discrimination and classism. He read the menu he knew by heart, wondering how many other customers had been treated this way. How many people had come seeking the authentic experience he promised in his advertising, only to be met with the disdain of employees who thought themselves superior. But who would approach to serve him at that forgotten table and change the course of his life forever? "Oh, my God," Chloe Miller murmured when she saw she had been assigned the corner table. It was her first day covering the afternoon shift at the Heritage Grill, after working 6 months only mornings to care for her brother, Henry, in the afternoons. She desperately needed the extra tips, but knew that corner tables never left good tips. Gary always put customers he considered unimportant there, students, construction workers, modest families who indulged in eating out once a month. "That table's yours, Chloe," Gary had said with that crooked little smile she knew too well. "I'm sure you and that customer will understand each other." The sarcastic tone did not go unnoticed. Gary always made these kinds of derogatory comments about her humble origins. Chloe came from a working-class neighborhood in Queens and had never hidden it. She was proud of her roots, her hard-working family, of having made it this far with great effort. But Gary never missed an opportunity to remind her of it as if it was something she should be ashamed of. Chloe approached the table with her best smile, the same one she used for all customers. It didn't matter if the table was by the window or in the most forgotten corner of the place. "Good afternoon, welcome to the Heritage Grill," she said with genuine warmth, looking directly into the eyes of the man sitting there. Robert looked up from the menu and was speechless for a moment. The woman in front of him was beautiful, but it wasn't the artificial, perfect beauty he was used to in his social circle. It was a natural, authentic beauty, reflected more in her sincere smile and expressive eyes than in any physical feature. She had dark brown hair pulled back in a simple bun, warm olive skin that spoke of her heritage, and honey-colored eyes that sparkled with a light he hadn't seen in a long time. "Thank you," he finally managed to say. "I'm very happy to be here." And surprisingly, it was true. For the first time in months, he felt genuinely content to be somewhere. "Is this your first time at our restaurant?" Chloe asked as she filled his water glass, noticing that the man seemed to observe everything with special attention. There was something about him that seemed familiar, but she couldn't place what. Perhaps it was the way he looked at the place, as if evaluating every detail, every sound, every aroma. Or perhaps it was the way his eyes had hardened when Gary passed by the table without even greeting him. "Not exactly," Robert replied carefully. "But it's the first time I've come alone like this." It was a strange answer, but Chloe didn't ask further. She had learned to respect customers' privacy, especially those who seemed to carry complicated stories. And that man definitely had a complicated story. It was evident in the way his shoulders carried a tension that didn't match his relaxed appearance. "Well, I'm glad you decided to come," she said sincerely. "Our grilled ribeye is the best in New York. Can I recommend anything special?" Robert ordered a ribeye steak with garlic mashed potatoes, creamed spinach, and a cold Coca-Cola. As Chloe took the order, he observed how the other waiters served the important tables. They went out of their way to explain each dish, recommend wines, ensuring nothing was missing. But when Gary passed by, supervising, he stopped at Robert's table with an expression of obvious impatience. "Chloe," he called out loudly so other customers could hear, "make sure this gentleman pays before serving the food. You know how it is." The humiliation was intentional and public. Several customers turned their heads to watch the scene, and Robert felt his blood boil. He had built that restaurant on principles of respect and dignity for all, and his own manager was trampling those values in front of him. But what hurt him most was seeing the expression of shame on Chloe's face. She lowered her eyes, clearly accustomed to this kind of humiliation from Gary. "Don't worry about it," Chloe murmured to Robert when Gary walked away. "He's like that with everyone. Don't take it personally." But Robert took it personally, very personally, not only because of the disrespect towards him but because of how Gary treated Chloe. He had noticed the tension in her shoulders when her boss approached, the way she had lowered her eyes, as if accustomed to receiving humiliating orders. "Does he always treat you guys like that?" Robert asked, unable to contain his indignation. Chloe looked at him, surprised by the direct question. Most customers pretended not to notice these uncomfortable situations. "Oh, don't worry about it, sir," she replied with a forced smile. "I'll get your order. It'll be ready in minutes." She quickly walked towards the kitchen, but Robert could see that her hands trembled slightly. There was something deeper happening there, something that went beyond a rude boss with his employees. There was fear in those honey-colored eyes, real fear. But what Robert didn't know was that Chloe would return to his table with something more than his order, something that would leave him completely paralyzed. Like this, if you want to know what was in that mysterious note. Chloe returned to the table, skillfully balancing the steaming plate of ribeye in one hand and the cold soda in the other. Robert immediately smelled the perfectly seasoned grilled meat, the creamed spinach that reminded him of his grandmother's. But there was something different in the way Chloe placed the dish in front of him. Her movements were faster than usual. Her eyes glanced nervously to where Gary was, and her fingers trembled slightly as she placed the napkin next to the plate. "Here's your order, sir," she said with an apparently normal voice. But Robert caught a tone of urgency that hadn't been there before. "Freshly made, as I promised." As she spoke, she discreetly slid something under the napkin. It was such a subtle movement that any other customer wouldn't have noticed. But Robert was observing every detail. "Enjoy your meal," Chloe added. And for a second, her eyes met his. In that look, there was a mixture of plea and despair that chilled him to the bone. Robert waited until Chloe walked away to carefully lift the napkin. Beneath it was a small piece of paper folded several times, the size of a bus ticket. His hands trembled as he unfolded it, wondering what could be so important that a waitress would risk passing a secret note to an unknown customer. The letters were handwritten in blue ink in careful but hurried script, as if it had been written in secret. "Manager Gary is stealing, changing prices in the system, keeping tip money, and threatening employees. I have proof, but he says if I speak up, he'll hurt my brother Henry. I don't know what to do. If you know anyone important, please help us. See." Robert read the note 3 times, feeling each word like a punch to the gut. His worst suspicions were confirmed in the most painful way possible. Not only was the manager stealing, but he was using threats against employees' families to keep them silent. The paper crumpled in his fingers as reality hit him like a giant wave. This wasn't just his restaurant being robbed. It wasn't just his money being diverted. It was something much worse. Gary was destroying everything Robert had worked for: the trust, the respect, the dignity of his employees. He was turning the Heritage Grill into the exact opposite of what Robert had dreamed when he opened it. His vision had been to create a place where both customers and employees felt valued and respected, where American family traditions were honored, where money was important, but never more important than people. And Gary had taken that beautiful vision and corrupted it completely. Robert looked to where Chloe was, now serving another table with the same professional smile, and realized she had no idea who he really was. To her, he was simply an ordinary customer who, just maybe, could help her. She had trusted a complete stranger because she had no one else. Robert put the note in his shirt pocket, directly over his heart, and tried to eat the ribeye that now tasted like cardboard. Each forkful was an effort, as he discreetly watched Gary move around the restaurant as if he owned the place. He saw him approach the register when the attendant was distracted. He saw him intercept a waiter returning with tips. He saw him approach Chloe with an expression that boded no good. Gary approached her as she cleaned an empty table and murmured something in her ear that made her pale. Robert couldn't hear the words, but he saw how Chloe's shoulders tensed and how her hands stopped on the tabletop. Gary smiled with satisfaction and walked away, leaving Chloe standing there, motionless, with a lost look. Robert felt a fury he hadn't experienced in years, a primitive rage that rose from the depths of his soul. That man wasn't just stealing his money. He was terrorizing an innocent woman who was only trying to make an honest living. When Chloe returned to ask if everything was all right with his order, Robert looked her directly in the eyes and said in a low voice, "I got your message." He saw her eyes widen with surprise and fear. "I don't know what you're talking about, sir," she murmured quickly, looking around to make sure no one was listening. "Calm down," Robert said in the softest voice he could manage. "I want to help you, but I need to know more." Chloe shook her head, clearly terrified. "I can't talk here," she whispered. "He's watching us." Robert followed her gaze and, indeed, saw Gary observing them from the counter, eyes narrowed with a suspicious expression. "Where can we talk?" Robert asked urgently. Chloe hesitated for a moment, clearly debating internally whether she could trust this stranger. "Central Park," she finally murmured. "Tomorrow at 8 p.m., near the main fountain." "But if this is a trap..." "It's not a trap," Robert assured her. "I promise on my mother." It was a sacred promise, and Chloe seemed to relax slightly upon hearing it. But what neither of them knew was that Gary had read their lips from a distance and was already planning his revenge. Night fell on New York with that characteristic May crispness, and Central Park was illuminated by lights that created golden reflections on the main fountain. Robert arrived 15 minutes before the agreed time, dressed again in simple clothes, but this time wearing a hoodie that had belonged to his father. It was an item of no monetary value, but full of memories. For some reason, he felt it would help him connect better with Chloe. He sat on one of the benches surrounding the fountain, observing families strolling with their children, young couples holding hands, elderly people feeding the ducks. That was real life. The life of the people who worked in his restaurants. The life he had lost somewhere between executive meetings and financial reports. At exactly 8 o'clock, he saw Chloe walking towards him with nervous steps. She was wearing a pale pink jacket that highlighted the golden tone of her skin, and her loose hair moved gently with the night breeze. But what Robert noticed most was the expression of absolute terror on her face. It wasn't just the nervousness of meeting a stranger, it was a deep, visceral fear. "Thank you for coming," Robert said, standing up when she reached the bench. "I wasn't sure you'd risk it." Chloe sat on the opposite end of the bench, maintaining a cautious distance. "I shouldn't be here," she murmured. "If Gary finds out, what would he do?" Robert asked, though he feared the answer. Chloe closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength to speak. "You don't understand, sir," she finally said. "Gary isn't just my boss. He knows dangerous people, people who can really hurt others." The words were like ice in Robert's veins. His restaurant wasn't just being robbed by a dishonest employee. It was being used as a base of operations for something much more sinister. "Tell me everything," he asked in a soft but firm voice. From the beginning, Chloe looked him in the eyes for a long moment, as if evaluating whether she could truly trust him. Finally, something in Robert's expression convinced her. "It started 6 months ago," Chloe said in a trembling voice. "My brother Henry got sick. He has leukemia and needs very expensive treatments that our insurance doesn't fully cover. I was only working part-time at the restaurant, but I needed more money, so I asked Gary if I could work more hours." Robert felt his heart clench. He knew that situation well. The US had a healthcare system that worked well for basic cases, but for complex diseases like cancer, families often had to choose between bankruptcy or losing a loved one. Gary told me he could give me more shifts, but that I would have to cooperate with him. At first, I thought it meant working extra hours without additional pay, and I accepted because I needed the job. Chloe paused, wiping away a tear that had begun to roll down her cheek. But then I realized that cooperating meant keeping my mouth shut about the things he did. "What kind of things?" Robert asked, though part of him didn't want to know. "At first, they were small things," Chloe continued. "He would alter prices in the system after customers paid and keep the difference. Or he'd collect credit card tips that he never passed on to us. I thought, well, it's stealing, but it's not my problem, right? But then things got worse." Her voice broke slightly. "He started bringing strange people to the restaurant after closing hours, men who didn't look like normal customers, and he'd make me stay to serve them, even though the restaurant was officially closed." Robert felt his blood run cold. His beautiful restaurant, his realized dream, was being used for activities he didn't even want to imagine. What kind of men? Men with tattoos, gold chains, expensive cars, but with plates that changed constantly, Chloe described, her voice growing quieter. "They talked about shipments, territories, things I didn't understand, but they sounded very dangerous, and Gary acted like he was their boss when they were there." Robert clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. His restaurant was being used as a meeting point for drug traffickers or some other type of criminals. Everything he had built, his entire legacy, was being corrupted in the most horrific way possible. "That's why you couldn't report him?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "One day he saw me photographing documents where he altered prices," Chloe explained. "He grabbed my arm so hard it bruised and told me that if I told anyone about what was happening at the restaurant, his friends would visit Henry at the hospital." Her eyes filled with tears again. "My brother is 17, sir. He's so weak from chemotherapy he can barely get out of bed. And Gary showed me pictures of Henry sleeping in his hospital room, pictures someone had taken without anyone noticing." Chloe covered her face with her hands and began to sob silently. Robert felt a mixture of fury and compassion that threatened to overwhelm him completely. That brave and beautiful woman was being terrorized to protect criminals who were using his restaurant. And worst of all, he, as the owner, was responsible for hiring Gary, for not supervising better, for allowing things to go so far. "Chloe," he said softly, moving a little closer on the bench. "Trust me." She looked up, her eyes red, but with a spark of hope. "Why would a stranger help me, right?" she asked. "What do you gain by getting involved in such big trouble?" It was a valid question, and Robert knew he couldn't answer it completely without revealing his identity. But there was something he could say. "Because what's happening is wrong," he said, with absolute conviction, "and because you deserve to live without fear." But what Robert didn't know was that as they talked in Central Park, Gary was making a phone call that would change everything. "Boss, we have a problem. The waitress is talking to someone. I think we need to send a message. Do you think Chloe will fully trust Robert? Comment below what you would do in her place. 3 days after the meeting in the park, Robert returned to the Heritage Grill, but this time with a completely different plan. He had dressed as a construction worker who had just finished his shift. Cement-stained overalls, worn boots, and a construction company cap he had bought from a street vendor. He had even dirtied his nails and grown a 3-day beard to look more authentic. When he entered the restaurant at 6 p.m., the busiest time, Gary barely glanced at him. It was exactly what Robert expected. To Gary, manual laborers were invisible. They didn't deserve his attention or respect. Chloe was busy serving a table of executives when she saw him enter. For a moment, their eyes met, and Robert could see the flash of recognition immediately followed by concern. He gave an almost imperceptible signal for her to remain calm and act normally. He needed to observe Gary's operations without raising suspicions, and the best way to do that was to transform himself into exactly the kind of customer Gary completely ignored. He was assigned the same corner table, and this time Robert felt grateful for it. For the next 2 hours, Robert observed and mentally recorded everything that happened. He saw how Gary intercepted tips that customers left in cash, pocketing them when he thought no one was looking. He saw how he altered bills in the system, adding drinks or desserts that had never been ordered. He saw how he treated employees with contempt, especially the waiters who came from humble neighborhoods like Chloe. But what hurt him most was seeing how Chloe tensed every time Gary approached. The way she lowered her eyes, how she slightly recoiled, how her hands trembled when he spoke to her. Robert had seen this same reaction in people who had suffered abuse and realized that Gary not only blackmailed her with threats against her brother, but intimidated her in ways that probably went beyond professional. When Chloe finally came to his table, Robert could see that she had deep dark circles under her eyes, as if she hadn't slept in days. "How's Henry doing?" he asked in a low voice as she served his water. Chloe froze for a moment, surprised that he asked about her brother. "How do you know?" she began to ask, but Robert gently interrupted her. "You told me the other day, remember?" he said with a reassuring smile. "I just want to know how he is." Chloe's eyes welled up with tears, but she managed to hold them back. He's getting worse," she murmured. "The doctors say he needs more aggressive treatment, but it costs so much money." Robert felt his heart break. Here was a woman working tirelessly to save her brother, being abused and threatened by her boss, and he had the power to resolve everything with a simple call to the bank. But if he revealed his identity now, would she trust that his intentions were genuine, or would she think it had all been a manipulation from the beginning? "Can I ask you a personal question?" Robert said after a moment. Chloe nodded nervously. "What would you do if someone offered you real help? Not free money, but an opportunity to completely change your situation?" Chloe looked at him with a mixture of hope and distrust. "Why do you ask, sir?" "Because I think you deserve something better than living in fear," Robert said with complete sincerity. "And because there are people in this world who care about doing the right thing." It was a dangerous conversation to have in the restaurant, but Robert couldn't avoid it. Every minute that passed, seeing Gary abuse his authority, every second he saw Chloe suffer in silence, brought him closer to the decision to reveal everything. "You talk as if you know these people," Chloe observed perceptively. "How do I know you're not another Gary trying to take advantage of me when I'm vulnerable?" It was a smart and justified question, and Robert respected her for asking it. "You don't know," he admitted honestly. "You can only trust your gut. What does your heart tell you about me?" Chloe studied him for a long moment, as if reading his soul through his eyes. "My heart says you're different," she finally murmured, "but my head says I'm a fool for trusting strangers." Robert took a piece of paper from his pocket and quickly wrote down his phone number. "This is my number," he said, discreetly sliding the paper towards her. "If you ever need urgent help, call me, no matter the time." Chloe took the paper with trembling hands. "Why would you do that for me? You barely know me." Robert thought carefully about the answer. He couldn't say he was the owner of the restaurant, but he could say a deeper truth. "Because I recognize a good person when I see one," he finally said, "and because I believe good people deserve someone to fight for them." At that moment, Gary suddenly appeared by the table. "Chloe," he said in a harsh voice, "what's this chat with the customer? Other tables are waiting." The message was clear: "Get away from Robert immediately." Chloe stood up quickly, but before she left, she murmured something only he could hear. "Be very careful. Gary's asking questions about you." That night, Robert couldn't sleep, thinking about Chloe's words and the way her eyes had shone when he offered her help. Over the next week, Robert established a routine that completely obsessed him. Every day he visited the restaurant in a different disguise, always asking Chloe to serve him. One day he arrived as an electrician, another as an accountant from a small firm, another as a grade school teacher. Each persona allowed him to observe different aspects of Gary's criminal operations. But if he was honest with himself, that was no longer his main motivation. What truly made him return every day was the opportunity to talk to Chloe, to see her smile when she recognized him despite the disguises, to feel that connection growing stronger with each encounter. He had never experienced anything like it before, a woman who saw him for who he truly was inside, not for his bank account or social status. Chloe had started to expect him, instinctively reserving the corner table when she saw him arrive, making excuses to stay longer talking to him. "My favorite customer has arrived," she would sometimes whisper when she approached the table. And those simple words made Robert feel more valued than all the multi-million-dollar contracts he had signed in his life. "How's Henry today?" had become the first question Robert asked every time Chloe came to the table, and she had started to tell him increasingly intimate details, how Henry worried about her, how he sometimes pretended to feel better so as not to distress her, how he read engineering books because he dreamed of building bridges one day. "He's so smart," Chloe would say with fraternal pride, "much smarter than me." Before he got sick, he had a scholarship to study at NYU Tandon School of Engineering. Robert listened to every word, memorizing every detail, feeling his heart fill, not just with love for Chloe, but with affection for a boy he had never met, but who he already considered important simply because he was important to her. "I'd love to meet him someday," Robert said one afternoon, and he saw Chloe's eyes light up with a happiness he hadn't seen before. "He'd love to meet you too," she replied. "I've told him about you." The idea that Chloe spoke of him with her brother made Robert feel a warmth that had nothing to do with the New York weather. Their conversations had evolved from cautious exchanges to deep confidences. Chloe had told him about her childhood in Queens, about how her mother worked cleaning houses to support the family after her father abandoned them when Henry was 10. "My mother died 3 years ago of lung cancer," she confessed one afternoon, "and I promised I would never let Henry suffer alone like she suffered." Robert, for his part, had shared carefully edited memories of his own life. He spoke of his love for New York, how he missed the simple times with his family before everything became complicated, how he sometimes felt trapped in a life he hadn't completely chosen. He couldn't tell the whole truth, but every word he shared was authentic. "Do you have family?" Chloe asked one afternoon. "I have parents," Robert replied, "but it's been a long time since we had a real conversation. Everything is always about work, about expectations, about keeping up appearances." It was a simplified version of the truth, but it perfectly captured how he felt. Small gestures had begun to appear naturally between them, like wildflowers growing unplanned. Robert always left generous tips, but he wrapped them in small notes that said things like, "For Henry's treatment," or "Because you deserve something beautiful." Chloe, for her part, had started serving him larger portions, making sure his Coke was always ice cold, bringing extra sourdough bread because the kitchen made too much. They were sweet lies that both understood as small declarations of affection. One day, Robert arrived with a scratch on his hand that he had gotten fixing something at home, and Chloe immediately brought him alcohol and a bandage without him asking. "You can't walk around injured," she said as she tended to his wound, with a tenderness that made him feel more cared for than ever. "Who's going to take care of me if you get hurt?" It was a question that sounded like a joke, but both their eyes said it was anything but. The glances between them had become a secret language. When Gary passed nearby and Chloe tensed, Robert reassured her with just a look, as if saying, "I'm here, you're not alone." When Robert seemed worried about something related to work or family, Chloe would smile in that special way she had, as if reminding him that good things existed in the world. One day, as she served him coffee, their hands brushed accidentally, and neither pulled away immediately. It was just a second, but in that second, Robert felt an electric current run through his entire body. "Sorry," Chloe murmured, her flushed cheeks indicating she had felt the same. "Don't apologize," Robert replied softly. Never apologize for making someone feel alive. It was a dangerous, intimate declaration, crossing the line between friendship and something deeper, but neither regretted having said or heard it. One afternoon, while Robert waited for his order, Chloe sat across from him for the first time, taking advantage of Gary having left to take care of some mysterious errands. "Can I ask you something?" she said, nervously fiddling with the edge of her apron. "Why do you come here every day? And don't tell me it's just for the ribeye." Robert smiled, knowing the moment had come to be as honest as he could without revealing the whole truth. "I come for you," he admitted simply, "because in all the places I've been, in all the people I've met, I'd never found anyone who made me feel so real." Chloe looked at him with bright eyes. "Real?" she repeated. "Yes," Robert confirmed, "as if I could be myself, without having to pretend to be someone else. It was ironic, considering he was technically pretending to be someone different every day, but deep down, it was the purest truth he had spoken in years. "I feel the same," Chloe whispered. "When you're here, I feel like I'm more than just a waitress trying to get by." But what neither of them knew was that Gary had returned early from his errands and had been watching them from the kitchen with a furious expression that boded no good. "We need to act fast," Robert murmured to Chloe as he pretended to review the menu he already knew by heart. It was Thursday evening, and the restaurant was quieter than usual, which gave them a perfect opportunity to plan their next step. Gary had been particularly aggressive in recent days, and both Robert and Chloe knew something bad was brewing. "He knows you're not a normal customer," Chloe whispered nervously as she refilled his water glass. "Yesterday he asked me your full name, where you worked, why you came so often. I had to invent that you were my cousin from upstate." Robert felt a pang of guilt for putting her in that position, but also admiration for her quick thinking. "Did he believe it?" he asked. "I'm not sure," Chloe admitted, "but for now, he hasn't asked any more questions." Robert discreetly glanced at Gary, who was supervising the register with his usual suspicious expression. "I need the proof you mentioned in the note," he told Chloe. "The documents, the photos, everything you have. They're hidden at home," she replied, "but I can't get them out. Gary has people watching where I live." The revelation that Gary had surveillance on Chloe made Robert feel a cold, calculated fury. This had gone too far. His employee was not only stealing and using the restaurant for criminal activities, but was harassing and threatening an innocent woman in her own home. "What kind of surveillance?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. "A car that appears and disappears," Chloe explained. "Different cars, but always the same men. And sometimes I see someone standing on the corner of my street when I leave early for work." Robert nodded, quickly processing the options. As a millionaire, he had access to resources Chloe couldn't even imagine. Private detectives, lawyers specializing in organized crime, police contacts who could handle this kind of delicate situation. But using any of these resources would immediately reveal his true identity. "Do you trust me?" he asked directly. Chloe looked him in the eyes for a long moment. "With my life," she replied without hesitation. "Then I need you to do exactly what I'm going to tell you." The plan Robert outlined was risky, but necessary. Chloe would leave her house at her usual time for work, but instead of taking the bus she always took, she would walk 2 blocks further to a bakery Robert had researched the night before. There, he would be waiting for her in a car borrowed from one of his trusted employees, and together they would return to her house via a different route to retrieve the evidence, while the watchers would think she was on her way to the restaurant. "It's too dangerous," Chloe objected. "We won't be seen," Robert assured her with a confidence he himself didn't know where it came from. "And even if they see us, it's time someone confronted Gary." There was something different in Robert's voice, a natural authority that Chloe hadn't noticed before. For a moment, he sounded less like a worried customer and more like someone accustomed to giving orders and making things happen. "Have you done this before?" she asked perceptively. "What?" Robert replied, realizing he had shown more than he intended. "Planning things like this, talking as if you know exactly what to do in dangerous situations." Robert hesitated for a moment. Every conversation with Chloe brought him closer to the moment he would have to reveal the truth. And every lie he told felt like a betrayal of the trust she had placed in him. "I've had to solve complicated problems before," he finally said, which was technically true, without being a complete lie, but never problems that mattered as much as this one. "Why does this matter so much?" Chloe asked, and Robert knew he had reached a point of no emotional return. "Because you matter," he replied with total honesty. "Because Henry matters. Because what Gary is doing is wrong, and because someone has to do something about it." Chloe reached across the table and briefly touched his hand. It was a small gesture, but loaded with meaning. "No one has ever fought for me before," she murmured. "Do you know what that means?" Robert intertwined his fingers with hers for a moment, before both realized they were in public and quickly separated. "Now I do," he replied, referring both to fighting for someone and to having someone fighting for him. The next day, the plan executed perfectly. Robert waited in his personal assistant's silver sedan, wearing a cap and sunglasses, while Chloe casually walked towards the Daily Crumb Bakery in Queens. Gary's watchers followed their usual routine, positioning themselves to observe the bus stop she would never approach. When Chloe got into Robert's car, he could see fear and determination mixed in her expression. "Are you sure about this?" he asked one last time. "More than ever," she replied. Chloe's house was a modest, single-story building on a cobblestone street with red geraniums in the window, speaking of the care with which she kept her home, despite the circumstances. "The evidence is in a box under my bed," she explained as she opened the door. "Photos, documents, even audio recordings I made with my phone when he talked to those people." Robert followed her inside, immediately noticing the details that spoke of Chloe's economic reality. Old but impeccably clean furniture, family photos in cheap frames, a small television that was probably 10 years old. In Chloe's room, as she pulled a shoebox from under her bed, Robert saw a photograph on the nightstand that made him stop completely. It was Chloe with a thin, 7-year-old boy, both smiling in what appeared to be Times Square. The resemblance between the siblings was evident. The same honey, colored eyes, the same warm smile, the same expression of genuine kindness. "That's Henry," Chloe said, noticing Robert observing the photo. "That was taken the day before he started chemotherapy. It was his 17th birthday." Robert felt something break in his chest. That boy, that child fighting cancer, was real. It wasn't just a sad story Chloe had told him, but a real person, with real dreams, who needed real help. And he had the power to provide it immediately. "Chloe," Robert said in a trembling voice, "I need to tell you something." But before he could continue, the sound of cars braking abruptly outside made them stop. "They found us," Chloe whispered in terror. Robert knew the time for revelations had run out. "Stay behind me," Robert ordered Chloe with an authority she had never heard in his voice before. He approached the window and saw 3 black cars parked in front of the house with men who clearly weren't from the neighborhood. Gary got out of the middle car, talking on his cell phone with agitated gestures, pointing towards the house. "How many exits are there here?" Robert asked quickly. Chloe was surprised by the calm with which he assessed the situation. "The front door, the back door that leads to the backyard, and a kitchen window," she replied, trembling. Robert pulled out his cell phone and dialed a number Chloe couldn't see. "Robert Maxwell," he said in a firm voice. "I need a security team in Queens immediately. Maple Street, number 234. It's an emergency." Chloe looked at him with wide eyes, slowly processing what she had just heard. "Robert Maxwell," she repeated in a whisper. "As in Maxwell Restaurants? As in the owner of the Heritage Grill?" Robert completed, turning to her with a mixture of determination and terror in his eyes. "Yes, Chloe, I am the owner of the restaurant where you work." Chloe's world swayed as if an earthquake had struck. Everything began to make sense in the most painful way possible. The familiarity with which Robert observed the restaurant, the way he knew every detail of the menu, his confidence in making promises of help, his knowledge of how to handle crisis situations. "Since when did you know?" she asked in a broken voice. "Since when did you know about Gary?" "Since the first day," Robert admitted, and saw tears begin to form in her eyes. "I went to the restaurant because I suspected something was wrong, but I didn't know how wrong until you gave me that note." "So, it was all a lie," Chloe murmured, taking a step back. "All this time you knew who I was, where I worked, how much I earned. You approached me as part of your investigation." "No," Robert exclaimed desperately. "That's not how it happened. Yes, I went there to investigate, but everything I feel for you, everything we shared, that's real, more real than anything I've ever experienced." Outside, the banging on the front door began, accompanied by Gary's voice, shouting, "Chloe, I know you're in there. Come out now." "How can I believe anything you've told me?" Chloe asked, tears streaming down her face. "You're a millionaire. To you, I'm nothing more than a poor employee who caused you problems." Robert felt those words pierce his heart like knives. "Listen to me," he said, gently taking her by the shoulders. "Everything in my life was fake until I met you. The people around me, who smile when they see me, who say I'm wonderful, they're all there for my money. You are the first person in years who saw me as a man before knowing I'm a millionaire." The banging on the door intensified, and the sound of someone trying to force the lock was heard. "When you tended to my scratch on my hand," Robert continued urgently, "when you asked me about my family, when you worried because I seemed sad, was it ever because you knew I was rich?" Chloe shook her head slowly. "No," she admitted. I felt something special for you from the first day, when I didn't even know your full name." "Then believe that," Robert pleaded. "Believe in what we both feel, not in the circumstances that brought us here." The sound of the front door being forced open made them react immediately. "Back door," Robert ordered, grabbing the box of evidence in one hand and Chloe's hand in the other. They ran to the back of the house as they heard the heavy boots of several men entering through the front. "Search all the rooms," Gary's voice shouted. "Find those documents." In the backyard, Robert helped Chloe jump over the low fence that separated her house from her elderly neighbors, Mr. Henderson, who was watering plants, and looked at them in surprise. "Mr. Henderson," Chloe shouted, "call the police, please." The old man nodded immediately and ran inside his house. Robert and Chloe ran down the alley behind the houses, hearing shouts and the sound of things being destroyed in her house. "My house," Chloe murmured in anguish. "They're destroying everything." "We'll fix it," Robert promised. "I'll buy you a new house if needed." "I don't want you to buy anything," Chloe exclaimed, stopping abruptly. "Don't you understand? That's exactly the problem." Robert also stopped, realizing he had said exactly the worst thing he could say at that moment. "I'm sorry," he said immediately. "I didn't mean it like that. I meant I'll do whatever it takes to help you. But in your way, not in my imposed way." Chloe looked at him with an expression of deep pain. "Do you know the difference between you and Gary?" she asked in a trembling voice. Robert shook his head, fearing the answer. "Gary uses his power to hurt people," Chloe said. "But you use yours to control people, maybe with good intentions, but it's control just the same." The words were like a slap to Robert, because he knew there was some truth to them. All his life, he had solved problems with money. He had helped people with money. He had shown love with money. He had never learned to simply be present for someone without trying to fix everything. "You're right," he finally admitted. "But I want to learn. I want to learn to be the man you deserve, not the man I have to be because of my last name or my bank account." In the distance, police sirens began to be heard, approaching rapidly. "If you truly love me," Chloe said, looking him directly in the eyes, "then prove it to me, by being honest from now on. No more lies. No more secrets. No more games." Robert nodded solemnly. "I promise," he said. "But first let me tell you something I should have told you from the beginning." He moved closer to her, taking her hands in his. "I fell in love with you when I saw you care for that customer at the corner table, with the same kindness you showed the customers at the important tables. I fell in love with your strength when you told me about Henry. I fell in love with your courage when you decided to trust me with that note, despite the danger. And I fell in love with your heart when you worried about me, without knowing who I truly was." Tears streamed down both their faces. "Now, what hurts me most," Robert continued, "is knowing that I may have lost the chance for you to fall in love with the real me, because I never gave you the opportunity to know him." But what Robert didn't know was that Chloe had a confession of her own that would change everything he thought he knew about their story. Do you think Chloe will forgive Robert? Comment below. "Robert," Chloe said softly, wiping away her tears with the back of her hand, "I also have something to confess." The police sirens were heard getting closer and closer, but at that moment, standing in the alley behind the houses in Queens, the world had shrunk to just the two of them. Robert looked at her with a mixture of hope and terror, wondering what else could change in a conversation that had already transformed everything he believed he knew about their relationship. "From the second day you came to the restaurant," Chloe continued, "I knew exactly who you were." Robert felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. "What?" he murmured, certain he had misheard. "You knew? My brother Henry is very intelligent," Chloe explained with a sad smile. "And when I told him about this mysterious customer who came every day in different disguises, he told me, 'Chloe, look up Robert Maxwell, the restaurant owner online.' And there was your picture." Robert stood completely still, slowly processing the magnitude of what he had just heard. All that time, while he worried about how she would react to discovering his identity, she already knew and had chosen to continue the game. "But why?" Robert asked in a broken voice. "Why did you pretend you didn't know? Why didn't you tell me anything?" Chloe took a step closer to him, and for the first time since they had run out of her house, Robert saw tenderness instead of pain in her eyes. "Because I realized something very important," she said. "You weren't acting like the millionaire Robert Maxwell when you were with me. You were acting like Rob, the man who worried about my brother, who asked me if I had slept well, who protected me when Gary yelled at me. Rob. No one had called him that since childhood, when his grandmother used that affectionate nickname. Hearing that name from Chloe's lips was like receiving a hug after years of cold. I understood that you were also pretending," Chloe continued, "but not pretending to be someone better than you were, but pretending to be someone simpler than you were. And that made me realize that perhaps for the first time in your life, you wanted someone to know you for who you really are, not for what you have." Robert felt tears streaming down his face, tears of relief and gratitude so deep he had no words to express them. "So, when you said you trusted me," he began to ask. "You trusted Rob," Chloe interrupted softly, "the man who sat at the corner table and made me feel like I was the most important person in the world, the man who promised to help me without knowing if I could give anything in return. And when you said you were falling in love, Robert continued, almost not daring to complete the question. I fell in love with Rob, Chloe confirmed, but also with Robert Maxwell's courage to give up all his comforts to discover the truth. I fell in love with the man who had so much money, who could have solved everything with a phone call, but who chose to sit with me on that bench in Central Park and listen to my story. At that moment, the police cars turned the corner of the alley, their blue and red lights illuminating the walls of the houses. But before they arrived, Robert took Chloe's face in his hands. Can you forgive me for not trusting you from the beginning? He asked. Will you give me another chance to be honest? Chloe smiled, and it was the most beautiful smile Robert had ever seen. I already have, she replied. I've been giving it all these days. The police officers approached running, but 3 black SUVs also arrived with men in suits who clearly weren't ordinary police officers. Mr. Maxwell, said one of the men from the SUVs, we're the security team you requested. Gary Peterson and his associates have been apprehended. We found evidence of money laundering and threats at Miss Miller's residence. Robert nodded, but never let go of Chloe's hand. What evidence? He asked. The documents that Miss Miller had collected, but also what we found on the cell phones of the men we arrested, the security agent explained. We have enough to prosecute them for fraud, money laundering, threats, and criminal association. It was exactly what Robert had expected, but he realized he no longer felt satisfied with just legal justice. He wanted something more, something that money and lawyers couldn't buy. He wanted a future with the woman who stood beside him, holding his hand as he spoke to the police, with a courage that filled him with pride and admiration. And now, what's next? Chloe asked, looking him directly in the eyes. Now comes the most important part, Robert replied. Now comes you meeting Henry and him meeting the man his sister fell in love with. 3 months later, Robert stood in front of New York Presbyterian Hospital, holding a bouquet of yellow flowers and a bag of food from the Heritage Grill. But they were no longer the same dishes served when Gary ran the place. Robert had implemented complete changes, a new manager who treated all employees with respect, higher wages, improved health benefits, and a scholarship program for employees' children who wanted to go to college. Chloe had been promoted to general supervisor, but more importantly, she had officially agreed to be his girlfriend after weeks of genuine, honest dates, where Robert appeared as himself, without disguises or pretensions. Nervous? Chloe asked, arriving at his side after parking her new car, a gift she had only accepted after Robert explained it was for security reasons, not to impress her. Terribly nervous, Robert admitted. What if he doesn't like me? What if he thinks I'm not good enough for his sister? Chloe laughed, that musical sound that had become his favorite in the whole world. Rob, she said, using the nickname only she was now allowed to use. He already loves you. He's been waiting to meet you ever since I told him the whole story. They went up to the 5th floor of the hospital, where Henry Miller was in a private room Robert had arranged, but which had officially been designated due to medical availability, so as not to hurt Chloe's pride. When they entered the room, Robert saw the boy he had only known from photographs, but who already felt like family. Henry was sitting in bed reading a structural engineering book, and when he saw them enter, his face lit up with a smile identical to his sister's. "Rob," he exclaimed, with genuine emotion. "Finally, Chloe won't stop talking about you." Robert approached the bed, feeling surprisingly emotional. That 17-year-old boy had fought cancer with a strength that humbled Robert, and he had done so while worrying more about his sister's well-being than his own. "Henry," Robert said, extending his hand, "it's an honor to finally meet you." Henry ignored the outstretched hand and gave him a strong hug. "Thank you," he murmured in his ear. "Thank you for taking care of my sister and for giving me a chance to live." "The doctors say the treatment is working perfectly," Chloe said with tears of happiness in her eyes. "In 6 months, Henry can go back to school and then to university," Henry added with determination. "I've already been accepted into NYU Tandon School of Engineering to study civil engineering. I'm going to build bridges like I've always dreamed." Robert felt a deep satisfaction that was completely different from any business success he had experienced. This was the result of doing the right thing, of using his resources for something that truly mattered. But more than that, it was the result of having found a family that loved him for who he was, not for what he had. "I brought food," Robert said, holding up the bag. "From our restaurant." "Our restaurant?" Chloe asked, raising an eyebrow. "Well," Robert replied with a shy smile, "I was thinking that maybe you could be a partner. You know better than anyone what that place needs to be truly special." It was a business proposal, but both knew it was much more than that. It was an invitation to build something together, to be true partners in life. They spent the afternoon at the hospital eating, laughing, and planning the future. Henry talked about his study plans. Chloe shared her ideas for improving the restaurant, and Robert realized he had never been so happy. When it was time to leave, Henry stopped them at the door. "Rob," he said, "I have something to ask you." Robert nodded, preparing for anything. "Are you going to marry my sister?" he asked directly. Robert looked at Chloe, who had turned completely red but was smiling. "If she'll have me," Robert replied honestly. "And when she's ready, then treat her well," Henry said with feigned seriousness. "Because even sick, I can still give you a few punches if needed." The three laughed, and Robert knew he had found not only the love of his life, but also the family he had always wanted to have. That night, standing on the balcony of Robert's apartment overlooking the lights of New York City, Chloe leaned against his chest as they gazed at the city that had brought them together. "You know what's most incredible about all this?" Chloe asked. "What?" Robert replied, breathing in the scent of her hair. "That you went to the restaurant disguised to find out the truth about your employees," she said. "But what you really discovered was the truth about yourself." Robert hugged her tighter, knowing she was right. He had gone to the Heritage Grill as a suspicious millionaire and had found the man he truly wanted to be. A man capable of loving unconditionally, of fighting without expecting rewards, of being vulnerable without losing strength. "I love you, Chloe Miller," he murmured against her hair. "I love you, Rob Maxwell," she replied, using the name that was only theirs. And in the city of New York, under the stars shining over the distant Hudson River, a millionaire and a waitress wrote the end of their love story, which was actually just the beginning of everything that was yet to come. Did you like the story? Subscribe to the channel and leave a like to support. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm happy my video reached you. A hug, and until next time,